hope you're ready to not sit passively for the next little while, because we've actually planned something that involves all of you engaging and engaging often. So we want to welcome you on behalf of the Green Party of New Brunswick. We're pleased to play the role of convener this evening, not leader for this session. Our agenda is to provide people with an opportunity to hear how others are thinking about our particular situation, to discuss our collective options, and hopefully to become inspired to engage in the process of democratizing this province. My name is Louise Comeau. I'm currently a PhD candidate at the University of Brunswick, and I'm researching how environmental ethics may or may not influence environmental lifestyle, broadly defined as our social, professional, and personal life choices. And citizenship is one of those important life choices, and I think we're going to hear a lot tonight about different perspectives on the relationship between citizenship and democracy. Tonight we're going to operate in as much of a round table as we can muster. So I'm hoping you've come prepared to play. The format will be as follows. We're going to ask 3 questions. The first 2 will be asked first of the panel, and then we'll turn it to you. Each panelist will provide a 3 to 5 minute initial response, and then I'll open the floor to your participation for the next 10 or 20 minutes after that. And then the third question will be completely open to you, and let's see if we don't even have to turn to the panel at that point. The 3 questions are: how does the political system work against your social eco-justice efforts? What changes can be made to address these issues? And the most important question, where do we go from here? Let me introduce the panel. I'm sure many of you know these folks. Jean-Claude Basque from Common Front for Social Justice. Jean-Claude was born in Tracadie. Before retiring 2 years ago, he worked for 20 years as a representative with the Canadian Labour Congress. Jean-Claude is a social and labour activist, and he has been involved in many struggles, especially the one against getting the unemployment insurance program responding to its being gutted in 1996-97. That resulted in the election of 2 NDP MPs, Angela Vautour and Yvon Gaudin, at first from New Brunswick. He's been a member of the New Brunswick Common Front for Social Justice since its inception 12 years ago, and is the provincial coordinator for the last 7 to 8 years. Ries, Democracy for New Brunswick. Roy and his wife Ethel live at Mary's Point. Roy's career has been in the human resource management area, and he retired in 2008 from a position in human resources with the government of the Northwest Territories. Since then, he's been an active member of Democracy for New Brunswick, which has been instrumental in organizing the NB Power Not For Sale campaign. The group is now working to create the conditions for a referendum on electoral reform in New Brunswick. Leah Levac, here, our Fredericton. Leah teaches leadership and social entrepreneurship at the University of New Brunswick and works to build capacity for social change making with students and community members. Her research focuses on engaging with socially marginalized populations in public decision making and policy development. She studied the design and implementation of the Provincial Citizen Engagement Initiative that resulted in the development of New Brunswick's Poverty Reduction Plan. In the community, she has served as the Vice Chair of the Board for Youth in Transition and was a founding member of 21 Inc., the network of young leaders committed to creating capacity for change in New Brunswick. Matthew Hayes is Occupy New Brunswick, and Matthew is a sociology professor at St. Thomas University and a community organizer who helped put together the Occupy Fredericton speaker series this past winter. He teaches classes on inequality in society and the culture of capitalism. He grew up in Dalhousie and moved to Fredericton in 2007. And some of you may have noticed that he announced his intention, I think today, to run for mayor. Julia Linke, anti-fracking activist. Julia comes to her concern about the risks associated with fracking via Alberta, where she studied the disturbance effects of forestry, oil and gas well site and pipeline construction, and mining and road construction. On moving to Teignmouth, Julia learned about the government's plan to bring the shale gas industry to this province, and so started a process of education that led to the conclusion that this is an utterly irresponsible plan. One of Julia's acts of citizenship was to initiate and attend 15 Thursday Centennial Building sidewalk protests against shale gas that ran from August to November when the legislature opened. David Coon, Conservation Council of New Brunswick. David is a 30-year veteran of the Canadian Environmental Movement. He has served as chair for the Canadian Climate Action Network, Canadian Environmental Network, and as a director of Friends of the Earth Canada. He worked to help CCNB win recognition from the United Nations Environment Program and the Canadian Environmental Achievements Award. I've known David for all of my environmental career, and he is for me a very wise mentor. With that introduction, let's start with the first question to Jean-Claude. How does the political system work against your social eco-justice efforts? 3 minutes, please. I have your watch.
I guess the political system is supposed to work for us the way, as we all know, is any political party, there's members, so members of which is citizens that are becoming members of a political party. Then they form an association, a riding, they send delegates to their convention where they decide on program and on leaders. So technically, this system, which is democratic, would bring the issue of ordinary citizen to the party and filter it through a program. But I guess the problem that, and I think this system was working probably better a number of years ago, but I think the real problem is this whole political system has been dominated, and more so lately, by the business community. And even if citizens are participating in a political party, like I'm talking in a liberal and conservative, when they come to power, they're not responsive to even their members. They're more responsive to part of their membership, which is businesses. And what we've seen, I think, in the last two mandates, which is Graham and now Allward, is we've seen more of businesses, leaders being involved in kind of running of the government. And I'll give you just a couple of examples. Well, we all know right now the Minister of Finance is Blaine Higgs, which comes from Irving, which just we have to get our head around it, but it's the minister that has more clout in a cabinet, and it's the one that comes from big business, and especially Irving, which control a good part of our economy and our jobs. So it certainly has an impact on what the decisions are made in the government right now. The other one also is, and this was started under Sean Graham when they changed the whole system of the health system. They created two bodies, one was corporation, which is Facilicorp, which is dominated by businesses. And the chair is Roxanne Fairweather from St. John, a woman that is CEO and president of Innovation. And this Facilicorp is managing for the whole health system everything that's not
administrative.
Administrative? Yeah, everything that's administrative, so the kitchen and all of that. So it's the bigger part of the health system is now run by a crown corporation that's dominated by the private sector in it. And if you look at the list, there's quite a number of people that are from the private sector. Same thing, they put together the New Brunswick Health Council, which is the CEO right now is Stéphane Robichaud, which was for a year the key person for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. So, and the other one that the grant, not the grant, but the Albert government put in place is the Investment Brunswick, which is mainly people from the business community. And even on the poverty issue, the grand government and this government has continued the same thing. Business is there, so business is now involved in developing policy for social issues. So I think that's one of the big challenges that all of us have in societies. Government, which is supposed to be responsive to our needs, is right now dominated a lot by business, more ever than before. And of course, the whole aspect that's outside of government, lobby group that are like the New Brunswick Council, Economic Business Council, the Carlisle Institute, the, I don't know what it's called now, but Future New Brunswick. So there's a lot of clout that business has now outside government, but a lot more inside government. So that has a real impact on democracy. And of course, the other aspect of it is all the question of the media and the controlling of the media by the Irving group. So I think these are three aspects where democracy, the political system is not responsible or responding to us more so now than ever.
Thank you. All right.
Hi. I want to thank you for inviting me to the panel discussion. And when I looked at the question of how does the political system work against the work that you're working, a variety of social issues, my approach to the question was, well, how should a democracy really work? And looked up several definitions, and they basically all said the same. Democracy is defined as a government in which the supreme power is vested in the people and exercised by them directly or indirectly through a system of representation involving periodic elections. So on the first part, I want to look at the issue of supreme power being vested in the people, and I'm going to use the federal government as my examples of how that's violated. And then on the second part of the question about elections, I'm going to talk about the New Brunswick situation. So supreme power vested in the people, it's very difficult to get citizens engaged about this. But at the federal level, we now have a Prime Minister's office and almost total control of Parliament. The Harper government has produced a handbook instructing MPs on how to disrupt proceedings of Parliament committees when they stray from the government line. Information to the media from the government is tightly controlled by the PMO. Canada's civil service, which has been the model that the envy of the world, has been muzzled by the PM office control over the Privy Council. And as an example, when Linda Coon, president of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, warned that Chalk River was a dangerous operation, she got fired. Okay? MPs are made to vote the party line. The PMO has attacked the media and